The first thing is we've got to talk the language of people and not the language of geeks. It's the difference between Microsoft and Apple. When you started with Microsoft, you had to become a geek because that's the way they told you. They said, this is a very clever system and you need it, so you better learn hieroglyphics, which I thought we'd left behind 3,000 years ago. But that's what we were told to do. And then along comes Apple and says, we're going to make it so simple that we don't even give you the instructions. And it's true. There are many 90-year-olds who catch on to it because it's done like human beings, and therefore the connection works. Listen to many of those who speak on our behalf, and they're constantly talking in languages which need to be learned. So we have to start where people are with language which they understand. And we mustn't be driven off by those who say, and scientifically they're right, that a particular weather event or some particularly hot or cold period can't be blamed on climate change. No, it can't. But the way to deal with it is the way that both Mayor Bloomberg and Prime Minister Cameron did. Prime Minister Cameron went to the Philippines after this disastrous hurricane. He said, no, it isn't just climate change, but it's worse because of climate change. And that is a fact which we just have to say all the time. Mayor Bloomberg, no, Sandy didn't happen because of climate change, but it was worse because of the climatic conditions that we now have. And we know that all the time these extreme weather occasions will take place. In Britain, we are suffering from the worst floods that we've had for a very long time. I couldn't help tweeting the other day that with the Australians with the hottest summer ever on record, the Philippines trying to clear up after the worst hurricane that they'd had, the America having the coldest snaps that they had ever had, and Britain flooded in areas which have never seen water before. It's all right, there's nothing happening to the climate. The truth is, people will not believe it in general, but they do believe it in their own hearts when that is happening to them, and they begin to ask themselves. So if they begin to ask themselves, that's when you catch them. And you catch them then by talking, secondly, about risk, because it's risk is the big issue. And I just want to ask everybody who's a homeowner here, how many people who are a homeowner do not insure their home against fire? Well, you're either a nation of renters. Of course you do. Now, I don't know, I meant to look up, but there's been a lot of things happening in the meantime, the parallel for Britain. But in Britain, the average cost a year for your home insurance is £140. Now, that is to insure yourself against an event which has a 99.2% chance of not happening. And yet the cost of the nations insuring themselves against an event that has a 90%, 95% chance of happening is less per person than the cost of insuring your house against fire. And yet why do we do that? Why do we spend that money when most of us would get through the whole of our lives without any possibility of our house burning down? Why do we do it? We do it because we know that if it were to happen, it would be so disastrous. It would so destroy our economy and our family that we don't want to risk it. And we've got to get people to understand that that's what the climate change issue is. It is that it's so disastrous that if it were to happen, what it would do to the world is something that we don't want to risk. And the last thing I want to say about how we have to get people to understand it, we've got to be cheerful about it. There is nothing so miserable as an environmentalist talking about climate change. And that puts everybody off. Now, I say this almost religiously, not because I'm a Catholic, but because I'm not a Puritan. And one of the reasons I'm not a Puritan is that they never win. During the dreadful period of the English Revolution, there was a man called Praise God Barebones. And he managed to get the government to get rid of Christmas as a pagan ceremony and festival, and to stop there for all sorts of things like mince pies. Now the fact is that the British people wanted Christmas and wanted mince pies, and they didn't care about Praise God Barebones. So the moment they had a chance, they threw him out and bring Christmas and mince pies back. And that is exactly what happens if we present our story in the terms of misery. Now, there is a real issue here because there are many environmentalists who are actually not environmentalists, but they are moral Puritans. They think we would be better off, morally better, if we were colder. They think that if we went fewer places, we'd be less tempted and probably better off. They don't like modern life. And therefore they join with the Tea Party, the other end. For different reasons, both of them hate modern life. One wants to go back to a period that never existed, but they think was there. I mean, Michelle Bachmann's family life, that's where they want to go back. And the other lot want to go to a place that ought to have been there when we were all wearing woolly knickers and funny hats. And neither are right. Because climate change is mainstream. Because it's true. And we have to make it part of the mainstream. And in the mainstream, we have to have a society that grows. We have to have a society that changes. We have a society that encourages. We have to have a society... Well, Cardinal Newman said, growth is the only evidence of life. And he was no theological pushover. And what he meant by that was that no society that determines that it will not be open to new ideas, changes, clever ways, technology, new thoughts, real challenges, no society that is like that ever prospers. And its people are miserable because the human spirit wants the opportunity to find new ways to change, to build, to grow, to get rich, to use those riches properly. And so we shouldn't be an anti-growth organization. We should be an anti-waste organization. We should be opposed to the misuse of our resources. We should be in favor of finding new ways of using them so that we do more with less, so that finally we can do most with almost nothing. That's what we should be about. And we should be about that not just because of climate change, but also because we're going to have 9 billion people to feed, clothe, and house. So I end there. In this sense, our battle on climate change is central to the battle for humanity. Can't talk about climate change without talking about the disgraceful injustice in our nations and in the world. Because you cannot achieve climate change unless you achieve greater social justice. There won't be an argument with India if you tell them that you've got to have so many people, 100 million of them, living at conditions which are totally unacceptable. You've got to have that, and you've got to put up with it, but you've got to play your part in dealing with climate change. Sorry, that's not on. So social justice is at the heart of this. And you know, that's why the extreme right and the extreme left dislike it. Because it's asking us to think about our fellow beings in a way we've never done before. And that's what I want to leave with you. this is the most exciting time to live since the Renaissance. There's never been a moment which is more exciting for us, because we're being asked to treat other people in a way and see other people in a way which we've never done before. Mankind has been imperialist throughout its history, since the first village bashed up its neighbour to get the herding rights. And this is the first time in which being imperialist is impossible, because we can only solve global problems with global solutions, and those solutions have got to be communal ones we all buy into, because if they're not, there won't be any. And that tells us something about the way we think of India and China, the way we think about Bangladesh, and the way we think about the South Seas. We have to think about them differently, because in the post-imperial world we didn't. That's why I voted against the Iraq War as a member of the Conservative Party in the House of Commons, and broke a 3-line whip for the first time in my life, because it was the last imperial war. It was the last war in which somebody thought that if you won, that was all that mattered, because you don't win like that anymore. You actually have to win people's hearts and minds. And we have to start with our own people, and then we have to move out beyond that. But I want you to go away saying to yourself, the one thing that matters, I am lucky enough to live at one of the great turning points of history. None of your boring 19th century or 18th century or 17th century. This is the moment. And I should be thrilled to have a chance to play my part in it, because that part is going to decide whether the human race moves to a new and even better period, or whether it's enmeshed and admired in its history. Its history can either be the springboard, or it can be that which destroys the initiative and the change which we need. Let's make sure that our history gives us the strength to change the world.